William Alexander Bustamante, national hero. He was born William Alexander Clark at Blenheim, Hanover in 1884. As a boy, he grew up on this hilly property a few miles from Lucy. Alec, as he was known, attended school at Cocoon and Dalmally. He had his own horse and spent most of his time riding over the property. Later, the family moved to Belmont in St. Catherine, and in 1904, 20-year-old Alec Clark arrived there to be the junior overseer. Many Jamaicans were leaving the island to seek their fortune in Panama, Cuba, and parts of Central America. Alec Clark left for Cuba and later went to Panama, where he served as a traffic inspector. Over the years, young Clark would return to Jamaica at intervals until finally, in 1934, he returned home for good, after having worked in New York for some 10 years. He assumed the name Bustamante and became known for his letters published in the local press. Jamaica of 1934 was still the plantation society. Sugar was the economic mainstay, the estates being British-owned and managed. The middle classes were criticizing the Crown Colony government and the colonial administration, and there was talk of constitutional reform. There was general unrest. Sugar workers, longshoremen, railway workers, all were seeking better wages and working conditions. Labor unrest took the form of strikes. At Frome Sugar Factory in Westmoreland, 6 persons were killed when police intervened to stop rioting workers. Pandemonium ensued. Sugar fields were burnt. Following the unrest, workers started to unionize. Alexander Bustamante emerged as champion of the masses. He urged that every employer hire 1 extra person, but strikes continued island-wide. Banana workers in Orocabessa, wharf workers in Falmouth. Bustamante began to travel to the country parts and organize the workers. He appeared on platforms making fiery speeches. He had been the subject of attack, he said, because he was on the side of the working man. The workers needed to be heard, and they elected Bustamante as their leader. He would walk the streets of the country towns, a tall, gaunt figure with flashing eyes and unruly hair. A flamboyant man, he captured the imagination of the people. On May 23, 1938, Bustamante, along with his aide, St. William Grant, addressed several thousands on Harbour Street. In Victoria Park, Bustamante climbed Queen Victoria's statue to address some 8,000 workers. The police, aided by British troops, dispersed the crowd. The following day, May 24th, both Bustamante and St. William Grant were arrested while on their way to the mayor's parlor to plead the cause for Kingston firemen. St. William Grant was clubbed to the ground. A furious Buster shouted, "Don't you dare touch me with your clubs." Norman Manley, a brilliant young lawyer and who was Buster's cousin, became mediator. 4 days later, Buster and Grant were released. That night, he addressed some 15,000 workers on the waterfront. He thanked his friends for their support. "I did not expect such an enormous amount of loyalty," he said. That afternoon, Bustamante, Grant, and Manley had met with the Conciliation Board, and a settlement reached. "I've been out of jail only a few hours, but I've got everything for you." Tumultuous cheering followed this remark. When he left the waterfront, the crowd followed him, their feet echoing on the wooden planks of the wharf. Soon after, Jamaica was filled with a new song. "We will follow Bustamante, we will follow Bustamante till we die." The BITU was registered in 1939. "The voice of labor must be heard through me," Bustamante stated in a letter to the press. At this time, there were several unions. They were united under one effective single union as the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union. He called for a minimum wage, legislation to regulate the employment of girls under 18, protection for workers using dangerous machinery, and workmen's compensation law. Out of the BITU, the GLP was born. A new constitution was enacted in November 1944. Crown Colony period ended and Jamaica was on its way to self-government. In the first election under universal adult suffrage, the GLP won 25 seats out of a total of 32, defeating the PNP, now led by Norman Manley. The new constitution was considered as being the most advanced in the West Indies. However, it lacked certain constitutional powers, and in June 1953, important changes were made. Bustamante was appointed chief minister, with 7 other ministers forming an executive council with greater responsibility for management of affairs of government. The Jamaica Labour Party had been the government for 10 years. In the election of 1955, it was the turn of the PNP under the leadership of Norman Manley to lead the affairs of the country. The PNP remained in office for 2 terms. Bustamante was knighted, and as Sir Alexander assumed the role of leader of the opposition with dignity. During this time, the proposed federation of the West Indies came about with Sir Alexander and the GLP firmly opposed. In 1962, the GLP were once again successful at the polls, largely because of a referendum in which the Jamaican people voted to stay out of the West Indies Federation. In that year, Jamaica became an independent nation, with Sir Alexander as Prime Minister. In September of that year, Sir Alexander married Miss Gladys Longbush, his devoted secretary and confidant since 1938. Sir Alexander had entered public life in his 50s. He was a total political being who had given himself without question to fight for the masses. They had accepted him in 1938 as a Moses come to lead his people to the promised land. He was a man of vigor, zest, and style. In 1967, his health began to suffer, and he retired from active politics. He was proclaimed a national hero in 1969, receiving Jamaica's highest honor at the same time as his cousin and political rival, Norman Manley. Today, Sir Alexander is Jamaica's only living national hero. He had a special quality which distinguished him from ordinary men. A man of charisma, who was concerned about his fellow man. A man who cared. A man of whom Jamaica is proud.